The sound of the slap cut through the noise of the afternoon traffic like a gunshot. People on the sidewalk froze. The cop's hand still hung in the air, his jaw tight, eyes burning with the kind of authority that forgot its own boundaries. The man he'd hit, thin, unshaven, wrapped in a dirty coat that had seen too many winters, stumbled backward, clutching his cheek. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't fight back. He just whispered something no one could hear and tried to steady himself. Across the street, parked near the curb, a biker named Jax watched it happen through the open visor of his helmet. He had stopped for a red light, half distracted, half lost in thought. But the sound snapped him back. His hands tightened on the handlebars. Jax wasn't the kind of man who got in other people's business, not anymore. He'd done his time in chaos, in fights that started with pride and ended in regret. But this was different. The light turned green, but Jax didn't move. He revved his engine once, then again, and crossed the street slowly, eyes locked on the cop still standing over the homeless man. The officer turned, noticing him. "Keep moving," he barked. Jax didn't. He parked his bike, kicked the stand, and walked toward them. The crowd had started whispering now, phones raised, some recording, some just frozen. Jax's boots hit the pavement with steady, deliberate thuds. "You hit him?" he asked quietly, voice even. The cop straightened, glaring. He was resisting. Jax looked down at the homeless man, blood on his lip, eyes glassy but calm. "You saw that?" the cop demanded. Jax's expression didn't change. "I saw a man getting hit for being small enough to hit." The officer's face reddened. "Back off before I arrest you too." The corner of Jax's mouth twitched into something between a smile and a warning. "Then you better call the whole station." The cop stepped closer, hand near his holster, but before he could say another word, a sharp voice cut through the tension. "Hey, Officer Kent." Everyone turned. Another officer, younger, hurried across the street. "Chief's asking for you." The older cop frowned but didn't argue. He muttered something under his breath and stalked toward the squad car. The younger cop stayed behind, kneeling beside the homeless man. "Sir, are you okay?" he asked softly. The man nodded, dazed. Jax crouched too, pulling a small bottle of water from his jacket and handing it over. "Here," he said quietly. The man took it with shaking hands. The younger officer looked at Jax, recognition flickering in his eyes. "You're with the Iron Hawks, right? The community riders?" Jax nodded once. The young officer hesitated. "You better come with me. Chief will want to hear this." An hour later, Jax stood in the police station's lobby, helmet under his arm, grease still smudged on his hands. The air was thick with tension. A few officers whispered as he passed, eyes darting between him and the captain's door. Inside, Chief Morales looked up from a stack of papers. She was a woman in her 50s, calm but sharp, the kind who could silence a room with a glance. "Mr. Hunter," she said, gesturing for him to sit. "I heard you witnessed an incident." Jax sat, resting his helmet on his knee. "I saw one of yours hit a man who couldn't fight back." Morales sighed, rubbing her temple. "Kent again." She stood and walked to the window. "He's been warned before." She turned, eyes narrowing. "You didn't hit him back, did you?" Jax gave a short laugh. "No, ma'am. I don't hit people who can't take it." Morales studied him for a moment, then asked, "Why'd you come here?" Jax leaned forward, voice low. "Because people like him think no one's watching. You and I both know what happens when nobody calls it out. I figured you'd rather hear it from me before the city sees it online." He pulled out his phone and slid it across the desk. The chief pressed play. The video was shaky but clear, the cop's hand rising, the slap, the silence after. When it ended, the room stayed quiet for a long time. Morales finally exhaled. "You just made my morning complicated," she said softly. Jax stood, picking up his helmet. "Then make his life a little less complicated," he said, nodding toward the homeless man in the video. "He's sleeping 2 blocks from here. Maybe someone should go see him before the reporters do." That evening, Jax returned to his garage. The air smelled of oil and rain. He sat on his bike, thinking about the man on the sidewalk, the fear in his eyes, the way everyone had just watched. He pulled out his phone again. The video he'd taken had already been shared by someone else. Over 1 million views, comments flooding in, the city demanding answers. He turned off the screen and sighed. He hadn't meant to start a storm. He just couldn't let it go. The next day, the news broke. Officer Kent had been suspended pending investigation. The department released a statement promising reform. Jax didn't care about the politics. What mattered to him was what he saw later that afternoon. A clean-shaven man sitting at the corner of 5th and Main, a new blanket over his shoulders, a cup of hot coffee in his hands. The young officer from before stood beside him, talking quietly. Jax parked his bike across the street and watched for a while, then turned the key and rode off. He didn't wave, didn't speak. Some things didn't need thanks. The following night, the story had already exploded across every screen in the city. What happened on that street? The moment Jax stepped off his bike and faced a badge that had forgotten its duty, was now the video every news channel played on repeat. Some people called him a hero. Others called him reckless. Jax didn't care about either. He wasn't chasing attention. He was chasing accountability. When the morning came, the police station looked like a storm had hit it. Reporters crowded the steps, shoving microphones at every officer who walked in. Chief Morales stood at the top of the stairs, her face calm, her eyes hard. Beside her stood Jax, hands in his pockets, leather jacket zipped, helmet under one arm. The chief raised her voice just enough to carry over the noise. "This department does not stand for abuse of power," she said firmly. "An investigation is underway, and corrective action will be taken immediately." When the questions started flying, she turned to Jax. "Would you like to say something?" she asked. He hesitated for a moment, then stepped up to the mic. He didn't shout, didn't sound angry. His voice was quiet, steady, and raw. "I'm not here to talk bad about cops," he began. "I've got friends who wear that badge, good ones. But when someone uses it to hit a man who's already fallen, that's not law. That's fear pretending to be order. That's not what this city deserves." He paused, looking down at the crowd. "I don't care if a man sleeps in a mansion or under a bridge. If he's breathing, he's worth respect. And if it takes a biker to remind a cop of that, then something's broken, and it's not just a rule. It's us." The crowd went silent. Reporters lowered their cameras for a moment, and even a few officers shifted uncomfortably. Jax nodded once, then stepped back. He didn't wait for applause or questions. He walked straight through the crowd, past the flashing lights, past the people calling his name, and got on his bike. That evening, when the sun dipped behind the city skyline, Jax rode to the edge of town where the shelters were. He found the man from the street, cleaner now, wearing donated clothes, sipping soup handed to him by volunteers. The man looked up, surprised. "You again," he said softly. Jax smiled faintly. "Heard you're doing all right." The man nodded. "They helped me get a bed. Said the department's paying for my medical bill too. Guess your video did something." Jax chuckled. "Guess it did." The man hesitated, then said, "You didn't have to stop that day." Jax shrugged. "I didn't. But I couldn't ride past either." The man smiled for the first time. "You remind me of someone," he said. "My brother used to say, real strength isn't loud, it's steady." Guess he was right. Jax stayed for a while, helping pass out food, fixing a broken heater with his bare hands. He didn't talk much, just listened to stories of lost homes, lost chances, and small hopes. By the time he left, the stars were out, and the city lights blinked like quiet promises. The next morning, Chief Morales called him. "They reinstated the community fund," she said. "Part of it's going to build a new shelter. The mayor signed off last night." Jack smiled. "Guess the system's learning to breathe again." Morales laughed. "Don't make this a habit, Hunter. The station's not ready for another shock like yesterday." "Then keep them honest," he replied. A week later, the same cop who had thrown that slap walked into the same shelter. He wasn't wearing his badge anymore. He sat beside the man he'd hit, eyes low, and said quietly, "I'm sorry." The man nodded without anger. "You did wrong," he said, "but you showed up. That's a start." When Jax heard about it, he didn't post it online, didn't tell anyone. He just rode by the shelter that night, watching from the street as laughter came from inside. For the first time in years, the city felt like it was learning again, learning how to be kind, how to be human. He revved his bike once, the sound echoing down the empty block, and whispered to himself, "Maybe that's all the shock this world needs." By the following afternoon, the police station was nearly unrecognizable. Reporters had left, the crowd had thinned, and for the first time in days, quiet filled the halls. But inside that quiet was tension, the kind that clung to every word, every step, every door that creaked open. Jack sat in the waiting area again, arms crossed, helmet beside him. He had been called back, though no one told him why. The young officer, the the same one who had helped the homeless man that day, came out from the hallway. "The chief wants you in her office," he said. Jax nodded and followed. When he stepped in, Chief Morales was leaning against her desk, a file in her hand. She looked tired but calm. "You really shook this place," she said without smiling. "Half the city's calling you a hero. The other half's calling me asking if we're working with bikers now." Jax raised an eyebrow. "You want me to apologize?" "No," she said, setting the file down. "I want you to listen." She walked around the desk and gestured to the chair. "Sit." He did. She opened the file, revealing a photo. Officer Kent, the cop who had thrown that slap. "He turned in his badge this morning," she said. "Said he wanted to do something that mattered." Jax frowned. "That mean what I think it means?" Morales nodded. "He asked to join the community outreach program. The same one you volunteered for last year when you rebuilt the shelter." Jax stared at the photo for a moment, then laughed softly. "You're telling me the guy who hit that man wants to hand out food now?" "People change," Morales said. "Sometimes it just takes getting hit back in a different way." Before he could respond, the door opened and Kent stepped in. He wasn't in uniform anymore. Plain clothes, sleeves rolled, eyes tired but honest. "Hunter," he said quietly. Jax turned his head slowly. Kent continued, "I was wrong that day. I thought wearing the badge meant I could fix everything by being tougher. I forgot that some people don't need force. They just need someone to look at them." He paused, his voice unsteady. "You reminded me of that." Jax studied him for a long moment, then stood and walked around the desk until they were face to face. "You don't fix what you did by talking," he said quietly. "You fix it by doing better." Kent nodded. "That's what I plan to do." The chief looked between them and said, "You two might as well start now. We're organizing a cleanup at the riverfront this weekend. Food drive, shelter setup, the works. You'll both be there." Jax smirked. "You really think putting a biker and a disgraced cop on the same team is smart?" Morales smiled faintly. "No, but I think it's right." That weekend, the riverfront was alive with movement. Volunteers unloaded boxes of food and blankets. Kids painted signs. And the same homeless man from before stood at the soup table, serving bowls with a grin that reached his eyes. When Jax arrived on his bike, a few people clapped, but he just waved them off. "We're all working today," he said. Kent was already there, sleeves rolled, lifting crates like he was trying to prove something. Hours passed, and as the sun started to set, the crowd began to thin. Kent came over, wiping sweat from his forehead. "You ever think about why you stopped fighting?" he asked. Jax looked up at the sky. "Because sometimes the best punch is not throwing one." Kent nodded slowly. "Guess I'm learning that late." Jax chuckled. "Better late than never." Then something happened neither expected. A little girl, maybe 8 or 9, tugged on Kent's sleeve and handed him a small folded napkin. "My mom said to give this to you," she said. Kent opened it and read the words written in pink crayon. "Thank you for helping the kind man." He blinked, looking at Jax. "You told her about that day?" Jax smiled. "Not me. Word gets around." When the event ended, the last of the volunteers began to leave, but the three of them stayed. The biker, the cop, and the man they had both met through a moment of violence turned into something human. Kent looked out at the river, his voice quiet. "You think people can really forgive?" Jax shrugged. "They already did. You just haven't forgiven yourself yet." Later that night, Jax rode through the city again. The streets were quiet, the lights soft and familiar. He passed the shelter and saw Kent outside, talking to a group of officers in plain clothes. He wasn't barking orders or trying to act tough. He was listening. Jax smiled beneath his helmet, the wind tugging at his jacket as he rode past. Sometimes redemption didn't come from being better than someone else. It came from being better than who you were yesterday. Several months later, the memory of that day had faded from the headlines, but not from the streets. The video of the slap, the speech at the station, and the quiet alliance between a biker and a cop had become something more than a story. It had become a lesson. Every officer who joined the force had to sit through a short training video now, one that ended with the words, "Respect is louder than authority." Morales had insisted on it, and Kent had volunteered to speak in it himself. The clip of Jax's calm voice saying, "You fix it by doing better," played right after. Jax never liked being part of speeches or training modules, but he couldn't deny what had changed. The station that once felt cold now had murals painted by shelter kids, showing officers shaking hands with people in the street. The shelter itself had doubled in size, funded partly by donations that poured in after the story broke. And every week, without fail, Kent showed up to help. One evening, Jack sat outside the same diner where everything had started, his bike gleaming under the orange streetlights. He was sipping coffee when Kent walked in. He'd just come off duty, the badge still pinned to his vest. He spotted Jack's and walked over. "You still drink the same thing every night?" he asked. Jax grinned. "Habits hard to break." Kent laughed quietly and sat down across from him. "Chief wants to expand the outreach to other cities," he said. "She asked if I'd go speak at the academy. She wants you to come too." Jax leaned back. "You want a biker teaching cops now?" Kent smiled. "I want a man who reminded us how to be human." For a moment, neither spoke. Outside, a bus rolled by, headlights sliding across their faces. Jax tapped his mug with a fingertip, thinking. "You know what's strange?" he said finally. "Back when I was younger, I thought respect came from fear. The louder you were, the tougher you looked, the safer you felt. Turns out it's the quiet that scares people more. The kind of quiet that means you won't back down because you don't need to yell." Kent nodded. "You taught me that. The night you didn't hit me." He looked down, then said softly, "I used to think compassion was weakness. Now I think it's the only thing that lasts." The doorbell rang as someone entered. The same homeless man they'd both once met on the street, clean now, hair trimmed, a small backpack slung over his shoulder. He spotted them and smiled wide. "You two still haunting diners?" he joked. Kent stood to shake his hand. "You look good," he said. "Got a job at the shelter now," the man replied proudly. "They say I make the best soup in the city." He winked. "Guess it's all about stirring things the right way." They laughed together, the sound soft but full of life. The waitress brought over another mug, poured coffee for all three, and for a while, they sat there like old friends instead of men who'd once been bound by violence. When the man left, Kent turned to Jax. "You ever wonder why things turned out the way they did?" Jax shrugged. "Maybe because we all needed the same wake-up call." Outside, the night was cool and clear. They walked to their vehicles, Jax to his bike, Kent to his cruiser. Before starting his engine, Kent looked over. "You know, there's still a few officers who don't like me much for what happened. They say I made the department look weak." Jax smirked. "Then make it stronger by being better. Weakness isn't admitting wrong. It's pretending you're right when you're not." Kent smiled and nodded once. "I'll see you at the academy." He got into his car and drove off. Jax sat on his bike a while longer, the city lights reflecting off the chrome. He thought about the strange way life had twisted their paths together. A biker known for breaking rules, and a cop known for enforcing them, both finding their peace in doing what was right. He started the engine, the familiar rumble filling the quiet street, and rode toward the shelter one last time before heading home. When he arrived, the front door was open, laughter spilling into the street. Inside, volunteers served food, music played low, and walls were covered with notes. Thank yous from people who had found their way back up. In the center of the wall hung a photo, the three of them from that first day at the riverfront, smiling under the sun. Below it, written in black marker, were 5 words. Kindness started a chain reaction. Jack stood there, staring for a long time, then smiled. He placed his hand on the wall, nodded once, and walked back out into the night. The city that had once felt heavy now hummed quietly with life. Somewhere behind him, he heard the laughter of children, the murmur of new beginnings. He revved the throttle, the bike roaring to life, and as the wind caught his jacket, he whispered into the night, "Guess this is what better looks like." If this story made you smile, share it with someone who needs a reminder that accidents can turn into beautiful beginnings.